My name is Renee Bracey Sherman. When I was 19, I had an abortion.
In the midst of our nation's frenzied political climate, Renee Bracey Sherman enters our society's socio-political conversations with her New York Times article, "Who Should You Listen to on Abortion? People Who've Had Them." While the topic of abortion frequently finds its way into countless political debates, the discussions often lack subjectivity, a sense of empathy that Sherman seeks to illuminate. The realities of abortion that go unaddressed in formal environments, but are central issues to the individuals that undergo abortions themselves. As an ardent pro-choice advocate, Sherman uses her rhetoric to try to reshape the climate around abortion, putting values of acceptance, empathy, and tolerance at the forefront of her claims. She crafts an evocative and remarkably driven passage. Her rhetorical goals revolve around her disdain with our society's judgmental perspectives and restrictive legislation. However, beneath Sherman's emotional, contemptuous undertone is an array of rhetorical strategies that help Sherman call for a change in anti-abortionist thought. Sherman uses a number of techniques that assist her in delivering her argument, from strong, multi-layered emotional language to ethical appeals that build up her own credibility, resulting in an impactful and thought-provoking rhetorical text. We're going to do an in-depth analysis on a few key aspects of the article: Sherman's rhetorical goals, her background and credibility on the issue, her motivations and exigencies, her intended audience, her extensive, multi-layered use of pathos, as well as other rhetorical appeals like logos and ethos. Let's start with Sherman's rhetorical goals, which aim to draw attention to the dismissive viewpoints of anti-abortion activists and politicians, arguing for a more empathetic dialogue that includes the voices of women who have had abortions themselves. But before we dive into the strategies she uses, let's go over some of the context for the author in her writing of this article. So first, let's look at Sherman's credibility on the issue. Sherman has been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, Time Magazine, The Atlantic, Huffington Post, and more. She's written books such as Saying Abortion Aloud, Research and Recommendations for Public Abortion Storytellers and Organizations, a Guide to Abortion Storytelling. Sherman also had an abortion herself at the age of 19, and has spent much of her life advocating for the removal of the stigma associated with abortion and foster a more open, tension-free dialogue. Next, let's look at Sherman's personal motivations as well as her extrinsic exigencies, or outside forces that serve as the reasons for why the article was written in the first place. Sherman's motivations stem from her own personal connection to abortion, not only her first-hand experiences consoling victims and families in clinics prior to and following the operation, but her own abortion as well. She talks about the kind and helpful nurse who cared for her throughout the operation, and after this experience, Sherman set out to ensure the same care for those who walk the same path. The article's extrinsic exigence, on the other hand, is a type of societal impetus, a pressing imbalance of opinions and beliefs, a skewed perception that is blind to the realities of abortion that stems from and furthers the stigma that is attached to abortion and the people who have had them. Sherman's intolerance of this conservative backlash against abortion, in addition to her own personal experiences, drove her to compose her argument. Now, in terms of audience, Sherman certainly draws in people that are already opinionated about abortion by including "Who Should You Listen to" in the title, but she also attracts moderate individuals that may not yet have a solid stance on a particular side of the abortion debate. Perhaps the members of Sherman's target audience are people who are not well informed and are currently in the process of pursuing more information. These are perfect candidates for Sherman to attempt to persuade. Alright, now let's get into the meat of the article, the rhetorical strategies that Sherman employs. Alright, get ready, I'm going to start throwing out a lot of rhetorical jargon here. So let's start with pathos, which in my opinion is Sherman's strongest technique. Pathos is a literary technique that seeks to evoke sentiments of pity, sadness, or in this case, empathy from the audience. Little disclaimer, when I say the word pathetic, I'm referring to pathos appeals. I'm not saying Sherman's writing is pathetic in the conventional sense. Anyway, one of Sherman's most powerful pathetic techniques is her use of enargia, a visually powerful description that vividly recreates a particular scene. At the start of the article, she tells a descriptive story about accompanying a young girl's abortion procedure. She recounts how the girl's body was covered with tattoos of birds and stars. Sherman rejects the tension felt with the girl's white supremacist criminal boyfriend. Rather, she felt a bond and knew the feeling of the young couple's anxieties about an unwanted pregnancy. After a dramatic buildup, the boyfriend expresses his gratitude to Sherman with a dramatic thank you. This story allows the audience to put themselves in the shoes of the young girl and her boyfriend, to more vividly perceive the tragic situations of women with a pregnancy that they cannot afford. It also serves as the cornerstone for the rest of the argument. Not only does Sherman effectively establish a personal connection with the reader at the very beginning of the article, the story foreshadows the main claims of the argument that follows, illustrating the sense of empathy that she emphasizes and calls for throughout the rest of the text. More examples of pathetic language can be found throughout. Sherman makes references to the victims she hugged, cried, and held hands with, how thankful her patients were, her disdain for the stigma and shame society thrusts on them, even the mere mention of the federal poverty line, etc. Sherman paints an evocative picture of despair, shedding light on the glimmer of love and kindness that exists within the heavily shamed community of abortion patients and sympathizers. Similarly, Sherman's continuous use of personal pronouns furthers her pathetic appeal to the reader. For example, she talks about the dire circumstances of the abortion community, saying, "We're trying to make ends meet and can't afford to expand our family at that particular time." By saying we and our instead of they and their, she identifies with people who have had abortions, creating a warm, friendly tone of camaraderie with the abortion community, one that stands out against some of the article's more serious language. This type of writing aims to have a certain impact on the audience, and I think it works really well. By expressing her own sentiments about the issue through her diction and anargia, Sherman projects the emotion she seeks to evoke from her readers. For example, the anecdote's emphasis on love and helping those in need is an attempt to elicit the same emotions from the reader, a realization, a willingness to ensure comfort and care for those who undergo abortion. Alright, let's look at the following rhetorical appeals of logos and ethos. Logos is an appeal to logic, a way of persuading an audience by reason. Sherman makes a really good point with a brief logical appeal when she writes, "Anti-abortion policies aim to bring about an end to abortion. However, history has shown us abortion will continue. The only question is whether it will be safe or unsafe." If we look back at the history of abortion, we find that there's a lot of truth to this. In many ways, abortion is inevitable and can't really be prevented. Despite societal or legal restrictions, people will seek out back alley abortions and other alternative pregnancy termination methods. This logical appeal by Sherman is an attempt to deem anti-abortion policies a futile cause. Ethos is an appeal to ethics, a means of convincing an audience of the character or credibility of the persuader. While we had examined Sherman's credibility on the issue before with her own personal experiences, she builds her credibility even further through the use of her statistics. For example, she writes, "Nearly 1/3 of American women are estimated to have an abortion by 45, according to the Guttmacher Institute." The Guttmacher Institute is a nonprofit organization that serves as a primary source for research and policy analysis on abortion in the United States, dedicated to advancing sexual and reproductive rights both domestically and across the globe. Sherman also talks about how women who are denied abortions are 3 times as likely to end up below the federal poverty line, compared with those who are able to get the abortions they want. These statistics, among others, show Sherman's credibility through the premeditated research she conducted prior to writing the article. As a writer myself, this article really connected with me. Renee Bracey Sherman displays a masterful understanding of not only the argument she makes on abortion, but also the manner in which she delivers it. The rhetorical goals she puts forth for herself prove to be well supported by a number of rhetorical appeals, such as her evocative, pathetic diction and anargia, logical, well-reasoned arguments, and a variety of both extrinsic ethical credentials and personal motivations. Not only does Sherman utilize an array of rhetorical strategies, but the way in which her appeals work together within the article structure considerably improves the effectiveness of her delivery. As the article progresses, it constructs a type of staircase effect. The initial pathetic appeal of the clinic anecdote warmly invites the reader into the article, establishing an immediate sentimental connection with the audience, positioning the logical argument and ethical citations that follow to be read in a much more meaningful context. Sherman's rhetoric comes at a time when it is needed most, but not just as a method to persuade readers to one side of the abortion debate. Through her pathetic appeals and the way she structures them, Sherman shows the necessity of emotional language when dealing with issues of diversity in today's world. By utilizing Sherman's type of honest and considerate communication, individuals can empathetically connect with one another and feel comfortable sharing relevant personal experiences or controversial opinions, unrestricted by formalities and without fear of being silenced or risking hateful response. Sherman presents herself not simply as a pro-choice abortion sympathizer, but as a proponent of boundless kindness that, in her words, knows no political affiliation or religious faith, seeking to bridge the variety of divides that society suffers from today. Sherman's rhetorical strategies reveal a way to unite people of all colors, backgrounds, affiliations, faiths, and sexualities, both nationally and on a global scale, through a more open and inclusive form of dialogue.